Hey guys, welcome to my channel. For this cake tutorial, I am so excited to show you this cake. This is a marbled look on fondant, but it's actually achieved using an alcohol ink technique that you would use on a canvas, but it's done with edible paint. This is my second time doing an alcohol ink cake, but this time I have some updates and it's a new and improved way to do this. So let's get right to it. We are going to start by getting our fondant ready to be painted. Now this is just store-bought fondant. You could use any store-bought. I think this time I used satin ice. And I added some shortening to it just to add a little elasticity because it's going to sit out for a while. And that shortening adds a little bit of moisture too. So it's gonna help it keep it from getting too dried out, which actually is not really a problem, and I'll try to remember to explain that later. But I measured the circumference of both my cakes, and I knew I wanted to do one technique on the entire piece that I would cut in half and use half on the top and half on the bottom. I wanted it to be kind of a continuous pattern or a continuous look. Seamless, I guess, is a good word to use for that. So I measured it all out, and I did kind of miscalculate. I measured it way longer than I needed, which caused me a few problems, but I worked with it. And these are the colors that I'm working with. These are airbrush colors. And we have 2 different shades of pink and 2 different shades of gray. One is darker than the other, and the pink one is lighter than the other. I ended up using one of the pinks. But what I did, I'll explain that later too, because I need to show you this. That is my heat gun. I have an airbrush and some eyedroppers. I have one for each color, and the one on the end is just Everclear. That is my alcohol, is Everclear, versus using the isopropyl alcohol that you would use for an alcohol ink painting. So we're using edible colors and some Everclear to keep it all edible. And this little tool here, it's just a little blow tool that you could use to clean off like your keyboards for your laptops, things like that. And there's my Everclear. So the reason I have that other blow tool is because not everybody is going to have an airbrush. And I understand that. So you can use that tool instead. And I ended up using that and the heat gun for the whole thing. You wouldn't need to use the heat gun. It would just take longer to dry. So I just stepped it up by using the heat gun. And what I'm doing here is just adding my alcohol first, then adding a few drops of color to it, because that alcohol is going to allow you to move it around so that it doesn't get stuck on your fondant. And then the heat gun, you move it around and it dries as you're working with it. Look at that. Isn't that cool? Now you don't want to hold it in one place for too long. You want to move it around. You don't want to put it too close to your fondant because you don't want to melt the fondant. But this actually works out very, very smoothly. It takes a little time, but you just do the same technique throughout your entire piece of fondant. Now I'm going to explain the colors. What I used was the airbrush colors. In my first video, I just used my color gels. In this one, I use my airbrush colors because they're kind of a thinned out color already. And you want this to be, I wanted it to be more of a pastel-y, lighter look. I mean, hard to be pastel with gray, I get it, but a little bit more translucent, I guess, is the word I'm looking for. And the gray is just the black, diluted black, and one I diluted more than the other. That's how I got the 2 shades of the gray. The pink is the pink airbrush color, and I added a touch of brown to make it more of a dusty pink, because I had a silk rose that I was using as my inspiration color, and some black leaves, and I was trying to match that color. So I think I covered how I got my colors and how I made them the 2 different shades of each. And like I said, I ended up using just the pink that had the brown in it as opposed to just the pink, because just the pink was too bright. And I knew that as this dried, it was going to deepen a little bit. So it looks a little brighter here, but it does oxidize and deepen a bit. And as I was going, I was also trying to soften those edges of the gray and the black, pale black, whatever you want to call it, so that they kind of blended into each other a little bit instead of being just one color in the middle and then another color on the outside edges. And how I used a brush, also a paintbrush, food dedicated paintbrush, just dipped in the alcohol, the Everclear, to kind of soften those edges. And then I let it dry. I would leave it to dry for a couple of hours. I put it underneath the ceiling fan for about 3 hours. Now it was still a little tacky, but I'm used to working with it, so I knew not to like rest that ruler completely on it. I'm holding it kind of up at an angle. But I would let it dry a little bit longer. And probably 4 to 5 hours would be good. I wouldn't go any longer than that. Like, I wouldn't go overnight because your fondant's going to dry out. And then it's going to really be hard to get onto your cake. So 4 to 5 hours probably would be about right. And now I'm just getting the cakes prepped. They are already filled and crumb coated, and I'm doing my final coat of buttercream on the top and the bottom tier as that fondant was sitting and drying. Now, one thing I should have done, you know, guys, you know me. If you know me, you know that I will admit when I did something wrong. What I should have done was put a piece of acetate underneath that fondant to help me flip it over, because you have to flip it over to get it around the cake for the bigger tier. The top tier, I was able to just lift it up and put it on as a panel piece. But the bottom is a little too long, and I needed something to help support it. Because with this technique, also, it will add kind of a crust on the top of your fondant because you're using that heat tool, the heat gun. So that's going to kind of like caramelize it a little bit, not by color, but just it's going to give it kind of that crunchy, toasted kind of feel to the outside of it. So here's where I was struggling with it. So I figured it out as I was going. I rolled out 2 different pieces of acetate. I had already cut it in half, and I tried to sneak a piece of acetate underneath that bottom one. So yes, I'm in the camera. Right at this point, it was more about getting it done than worrying about me being in the view or in view of the camera. So I kind of wanted you to see what I was doing there. And since it was still a little tacky, I did put a little bit of, that was just cornstarch on top of it to keep the top one from sticking. But I did put a little shortening on that bottom one before I slid it underneath the fondant so that it wouldn't slide out when I flipped it over there. And then I just lifted it onto the cake. That sounds really complicated, but long story short, if you had put that acetate underneath it to begin with, when you cut through the fondant, you could cut through both pieces, both the fondant and the acetate, as long as you're doing it on one of those self-healing mats. Would have solved a lot of problems. And then I just lifted it on there, and I had actually sprayed the cake with a little bit of water so that the fondant would stick. You could do shortening or water. Either one works. And then just cut that excess piece off and butt those 2 ends together and use your smoother to remove any air bubbles that you might get underneath that fondant. Now, I did not put a piece on the top. I just thought it was going to be fine. Since it's a pale color, whatever. I just didn't do it, and nobody's going to notice. And see that top tier, I was able to just kind of lift it up and place it right on. And then remove your excess from that one also. Now, I'd placed them both cakes in the refrigerator for about 30 minutes so that I could go back in and just use a straight blade or a sharp knife to remove that excess off the top. And then I placed 3 straws to support the top tier. Since these are smaller tiers, that top tier was only a 5-inch tier. So I didn't worry about putting too many straws on there. And then I removed the excess from the top also. And just use the top of your cake as a guide to how you're cutting it, to where you need to cut it. And now, to tie it all together, you know me, gotta add the gold. I thought about doing rose gold, but I don't have any. Hard to do it when you don't have it. So I just went with the gold, and I'm just adding some veining. So you can call this marbling if you want to, or you can just call it the alcohol ink. Edible alcohol ink. That's why I'm calling it alcohol ink marbling. But I think it's very unique. And I haven't really seen this out there, so spread the word, guys, that this is a pretty cool technique by sharing the video. Here's my plug. Sharing the video, commenting, all the things so that I get a little bit more exposure would be awesome. Down low, I hate doing that. But I feel like it's part of my job as as an influencer or a YouTuber, as I have to promote myself. And then there's the flower and the little black leaves. You can use fresh flowers if you want to, but since I don't sell these, I don't want to waste flowers, so I just use my silk flowers. And I hope you guys liked it. I really hope you liked it. And I'd like to use this technique again. So let me know if you like this. And if you give it a try, send me some pictures on Instagram. Same name, Sophisticakes by Mary. I always love to see what you guys do. I hope you enjoyed it. So thank you guys so much for taking the time to watch my video. And if you'd like to watch some other videos, go ahead and click on the link to one of these other videos shown here. And if you would like to check out my other social media, I am on Facebook and Instagram under the same name, Sophisticakes by Mary. And please take the time to share, like, subscribe, and hit the notification bell so that you know when I upload another video. Thank you so much, and we'll catch you on the next tutorial.